Six of Crows by Lee Bardugo. To Kate, secret weapon, unexpected friend. Part 1, Shadow Business. Chapter 1, Juiced. Juiced had two problems, the moon and his mustache. He was supposed to be making his rounds at the Hode house, but for the last 15 minutes he'd been hovering around the southeast wall of the gardens, trying to think of something clever and romantic to say to Anya. If only Anya's eyes were blue like the sea or green like an emerald. Instead, her eyes were brown. Lovely, dreamy, melted chocolate brown, rabbit fur brown. Just tell her she's got skin like the moonlight, his friend Peter had said. Girls love that. A perfect solution, but the Ketterdam weather was not cooperating. There'd been no breeze off the harbor that day, and a gray milk fog had wreathed the city's canals in crooked alleys and damp. Even here, among the mansions of the Geldstraat, the air hung thick with the smell of fish and bilge water, and smoke from the refineries on the city's outer islands had smeared the night sky in a briny haze. The full moon looked less like a jewel than a yellowy blister in need of lancing. Maybe he could compliment Anya's laugh, except he'd never heard her laugh. He wasn't very good with jokes. Juiced glanced at his reflection in one of the glass panels set to the double doors that led from the house to the side garden. His mother was right. Even in his new uniform, he still looked like a baby. Gently, he brushed his finger along his upper lip. If only his mustache would come in. It definitely felt thicker than yesterday. He'd been a guard at the Stadwatch less than 6 weeks, and it wasn't nearly as exciting as he'd hoped. He thought he'd be running down thieves in barrel or patrolling the harbors, getting first look at cargo coming down on the docks. But ever since the assassination of that ambassador at the town hall, the Merchant Council has been grumbling about security. So where was he? Stuck walking in circles at some lucky mercher's house. Not just any mercher, though. Councilman Hode was about as high-placed in Ketterdam government as a man could be, the kind of man who could make a career. Juiced adjusted the set of his coat and rifle and then patted the weighted baton at his hip. Maybe Hode would take a liking to him. Sharp-eyed and quick with the cudgel, Hode would say. That fellow deserves a promotion. Sergeant Juiced Van Pole, he whispered, savoring the sound of the words Captain Juiced Van Pole. Stop gawking at yourself. Juiced whirled, cheeks going hot as Henk and Rutger strode into the side garden. They were both older, bigger, and broader of the shoulder than Juiced, and they were house guards, private servants of Councilman Hode. That meant they wore pale green livery, carried fancy rifles from Novi Zem, and never let Juiced forget he was a lowly grunt from the City Watch. Petting that bit of fuzz isn't going to make it grow any faster, Rutger said with a loud laugh. Juiced tried to summon some dignity. I need to finish my rounds. Rutger elbowed Henk. That means he's going to go stick his head in the Grisha workshop to get a look at his girl. Oh, Anya, won't you use your Grisha magic to make my mustache grow? Henk mocked. Juiced turned on his heel, cheeks burning, and he strode down the eastern side of the house. They'd been teasing him ever since he arrived. If it hadn't been for Anya, he probably would have pleaded with his captain for a reassignment. He and Anya only ever exchanged a few words on his rounds, but she was always the best part of his night. And he had to admit, he liked the Hode house, too. The few peeks he'd managed to the windows, Hode had one of the grandest mansions on the Geldstraat, floors set with gleaming squares of black and white stone, shining dark wood walls lit by blown glass chandeliers and floated like jellyfish near the coffered ceilings. Sometimes Juice liked to pretend that it was his house, that he was a rich mercher just out for a stroll through his fine garden. Before he rounded the corner, Juice took a deep breath. Anya, your eyes are brown like tree bark? He'd think of something. He was better off being spontaneous anyway. He was surprised to see the glass-paneled doors to the Grisha workshop open, more than the hand-painted blue tiles in the kitchen or the mantels laden with potted tulips. This workshop was a testimony to the Hode's wealth. Grisha indentures didn't come cheap, and Hode had 3 of them. But Yuri wasn't seated at the work table, and Anya was nowhere to be seen. Only Redvenko was there, sprawled out on a chair in dark blue robes, eyes shut, book open on his chest. Joost hovered in the doorway, then cleared his throat. "These doors should be shut and locked at night." "House is like furnace," Redvenko drawled without opening his eyes, his Ravkan accent thick and rolling. "Tell Hod I stop sweating, I close doors." Redvenko was a squalor, older than the other Grisha indentures, his hair shot through with silver. There were rumors he'd fought for the losing side in Ravka's civil war and had fled to Kerch after the fighting. "I'd be happy to present your complaints to Councilman Hode," Juice lied. The house was always overheated, as if Hode were under obligation to burn coal, but Juice wasn't going to be the one to mention it. "Until then, you bring news of Yuri?" Redvenko interrupted, finally opening his heavily hooded eyes. Juice glanced uneasily at the bowl of red grapes and heaps of burgundy velvet on the work table. Yuri had been working on bleeding color from the fruit into the curtains for Mistress Hode, but he'd fallen badly ill a few days ago, and Juice hadn't seen him since. Dust had begun to gather on the velvet, and the grapes were going bad. "I haven't heard anything." "Of course you hear nothing. Too busy strutting around in stupid purple uniform." What was wrong with his uniform? And why did Ravenko even have to be here? He was Hode's personal squalor and often traveled to the merchant's most precious cargo, guaranteeing favorable winds to bring the ship safely and quickly to harbor. Why couldn't he be away at sea now? "I think Yuri may be quarantined." "So helpful," Redvenko said with a sneer. "You can stop craning neck like hopeful goose," he added. "Anya is gone." Juice felt his face heat again. "Where is she?" he asked, trying to sound authoritative. "She should be in after dark." 1 hour ago, Hode takes her, same as night he came for Yuri." "What do you mean he came for Yuri? Yuri fell ill." "Hode comes for Yuri, Yuri come back sick, 2 days later Yuri vanishes for good. Now Anya." For good? Maybe there was an emergency. If someone needed to be healed. "First Yuri, now Anya. I will be next, and no one will notice except poor little Officer Just. Go now." If Councilman Hode, Ravenko raised an arm and a gust of air slammed Juice backwards. Juice scrambled to keep his footing, grabbing for the doorframe. "I said now." Ravenko etched a circle in the air, and the door slammed shut. Juice let go just in time to avoid having his fingers smashed and toppled into the side garden. He got to his feet quickly as he could, wiping muck from his uniform, shame squirming in his belly. One of the glass panes in the door had cracked from the force. Through it, he saw the squalor smirking. "That's counting against your indenture," Juice said, pointing to the ruined pane. He hated how small and petty his voice sounded. Ravenko waved his hand, and the doors trembled on their hinges. Without meaning to, Juice took a step back. "Go make your rounds, little watchdog," Ravenko called. "That went well," snickered Rutger, leaning against the garden wall. How long had he been standing there? "Don't you have something better to do than follow me around?" Juice asked. "All guards are to report to the boathouse, even you. Or are you too busy making friends?" I was asking him to shut the door. Rutger shook his head. "You don't ask, you tell. They're servants, not honored guests." Juice fell into step beside him, inside still churning with humiliation. The worst part was that Rutger was right. Ravenko had no business talking to him that way. But what was Juice supposed to do? Even if he had the courage to get into a fight with a squalor, it would be like brawling with an expensive vase. The Grisha weren't just servants, they were Hode's treasured possessions. What had Ravenko meant about Yuri and Anya being taken anyway? Had he been covering for Anya? Grisha indentures were kept to the house for good reason. To walk the streets without protection was to risk getting plucked up by a slaver and never seen again. Maybe she's meeting someone, Juice speculated miserably. His thoughts were interrupted by the blaze of light and activity down by the boathouse that faced the canal. Across the water, he could see other fine merchant houses, tall and slender, the tidy gables of the rooftops making a dark silhouette against the sky, their gardens and boathouses lit by glowing lanterns. A few weeks before, Juice had been told that Hode's boathouse would be undergoing improvements and to strike from his rounds. But he and Rutger entered, he saw no paint or scaffolding. The gondolas and oars had been pushed up against the wall. The other house guards were there in the sea green livery, and Juice recognized 2 Stadwatch guards in purple, but most of the interior was taken up by a huge box. A kind of freestanding cell that looked like it was made by reinforced steel, its seams thick with rivets, a huge window embedded in one of its walls. The glass had a wavy bent, and through it, Juice could see a girl seated at a table, clutching her red silks tied around her. Behind her, a Stadwatch guard stood at attention. Anya, Juice realized with a start. Her brown eyes were wide and frightened, her skin pale. The little boy sitting across from her looked doubly terrified. His hair was sleep mussed, and his legs dangled from the chair, kicking nervously at the air. "Why all the guards?" asked Juice. There had to be more than 10 of them crowded into the boathouse. Councilman Hode was there too, along with a merchant Juice didn't know, both of them dressed in merch or black. Juice stood up straighter than when he saw they were talking to the captain of the Stadwatch. He hoped he'd gotten all the garden mud off his uniform. "What is this?" Rutger shrugged. "Who cares? It's a break in the routine." Juice looked back through the glass. Anya was staring at him, her gaze unfocused. The day he'd arrived at the Hode house, she healed a bruise on his cheek. It had been nothing, the yellow-green remnants of a crack he'd taken to the face during a training exercise. But apparently Hode had caught sight of it and didn't like his guards looking like thugs. Juice had been sent to the Grisha workshop, and Anya had sat him down in a bright square of late winter sunlight. Her cool fingers passed over his skin, and through the itch. And though the itch had been terrible, bare seconds later, it was as if the bruise had never been. When Juice thanked her, Anya smiled, and Juice was lost. He knew his cause was hopeless, even if she'd had any interest in him. He could never afford to buy her indenture from Hode, and she would never marry unless Hode decreed it, but it hadn't stopped him from dropping by to say hello or to bring her little gifts. She liked the map of Kerch best, a whimsical drawing of their island nation surrounded by mermaids swimming in the true sea and ships blown along by winds depicted as fat-cheeked men. It was a cheap souvenir, the kind tourists brought along the East Stave, but it had seemed to please her. Now he risked raising a hand in greeting. Anya showed no reaction. "She can't see you, moron," laughed Rutger. "The glass is mirrored on the other side." Juiced cheeks pinked. "How was I to know that?" "Open your eyes and pay attention for once." First Yuri, now Anya. "Why do they need a Grisha healer?" "Is that boy injured?" "He looks fine to me." The captain and Hode seemed to reach some kind of agreement. Through the glass, Juice saw Hode enter the cell and give the boy an encouraging pat. There must have been vents in the cell because he heard Hode say, "Be a brave lad, and there's a few Kruga in it for you." Then he grabbed Anya's chin with a liver-spotted hand. She tensed, and Juice's gut tightened. Hode gave Anya's head a little shake. "Do as you're told, and this will be over soon, yeah?" She gave a small, tight smile. "Of course, uncle." Hode whispered a few words to the guard behind Anya, then stepped out. The door shut with a loud clang, and Hode slid a heavy lock into place. Hode and the other merchant took positions almost directly in front of Juice and Rutger. The merchant Juice didn't know said, "Are you sure this is wise? This girl is a korpelnik. After what happened to your fabricator, if it was Retvenko, I'd be worried, but Anya has a sweet disposition. She's a healer, not prone to aggression." "And you've lowered the dose?" "Yes, but we agreed that if we have the same results as the fabricator, the council will compensate me. I can't be asked to bear that expense." The merchant nodded, and Hode signaled to the captain. "Proceed." "The same results as the fabricator." Ravenko claimed that Yuri had vanished. Was that what he'd meant? "Sergeant," said the captain, "are you ready?" The guard inside the cell replied, "Yes, sir." He drew a knife. Juice swallowed hard. "First test," said the captain. The guard bent forward and told the boy to roll up his sleeve. The boy obeyed and stuck out his arm, popping the thumb of his other hand into his mouth. Too old for that, thought Juiced, but the boy must be very scared. Juice had slept with a sock bear until he was nearly 14, a fact his older brothers had mocked mercilessly. This will sting just a bit, said the guard. The boy kept his thumb in his mouth and nodded, eyes round. This really isn't necessary, said Anya. Quiet, please, said Hode. The guard gave the boy a pat, then slashed a bright red cut across his forearm. The boy started crying immediately. Anya tried to rise from her chair, but the guard placed a stern hand on her shoulder. It's all right, Sergeant, said Hode. Let her heal him. Anya leaned forward, taking the boy's hand gently. Shh, she said softly. Let me help. Will it hurt? The boy gulped. She smiled. Not at all, just a little itch. Try to hold still for me? Juice found himself leaning closer. He'd never actually seen Anya heal someone. Anya removed a handkerchief from her sleeve and wiped away the excess blood. Then her fingers brushed carefully over the boy's wound. Juice watched in astonishment as the skin slowly seemed to reform and knit together. A few minutes later, the boy grinned and held out his arm. It looked a little bit red, but otherwise smooth and unmarked. Was that magic? Anya tapped him on the nose. Of a sort. The same magic your own body works when given time and a bit of a bandage. The boy looked almost disappointed. Good, said Hode, impatiently. Now the parum. Juice frowned. He'd never heard that word. The captain signaled to his sergeant. Second sequence. Put out your arm, said the sergeant to the boy once again. The boy shook his head. I don't like that part. Do it. The boy's lower lip quivered, but he put out his arm. The guard cut him once more, and then he placed a small wax envelope on the table in front of Anya. Swallow the contents of the packet, Hode instructed Anya. What is it? She asked, voice trembling. That isn't your concern. What is it? She repeated. It's not going to kill you. We're going to ask you to perform some simple tasks to judge the drug's effects. The sergeant is there to make sure you only do what you're told and no more. Understood? Her jaw set, but she nodded. No one will harm you, said Hode. But remember, if you hurt the sergeant, you have no way out of that cell. The doors are locked from the outside. What is that stuff? Whispered Juiced. Don't know, said Rutger. What do you know? He muttered. Enough to keep my trap shut. Juiced scowled. With shaking hands, Anya lifted the wax envelope and opened the flap. Go on, said Hode. She tipped her head back and swallowed the powder. For a moment, she sat waiting, lips pressed together. Is it just Jorda? She asked hopefully. Juice found himself hoping, too. Jorda was nothing to fear, a stimulant everyone in the Stadwatch chewed to stay awake on late watches. What does it taste like? Hode asked. Like Jorda, but sweeter. Anya inhaled sharply, her hands seized the table, her pupils dilating enough that her eyes looked nearly black. Oh, she sighed. It was nearly a purr. The guard tightened his grip on her shoulder. How do you feel? She stared at the mirror and smiled, her tongue peeked through her white teeth, stained like rust. Juice suddenly felt cold. Just as it was with the fabricator, murmured the merchant. Heal the boy, Hode commanded. She waved her hand through the air, a gesture almost dismissive, and the cut on the boy's arm sealed instantly. The blood lifted briefly from his skin, and droplets of red then vanished. His skin looked perfectly smooth, all traces of blood or redness gone. The boy beamed. That was definitely magic. Feels like magic, Anya said, in that same eerie smile. She didn't touch him, marveled the captain. Anya, said Hode, listen closely. We're going to tell the guard to perform the next test now. Hummed Anya. Sergeant, said Hode, cut off the boy's thumb. The boy howled and started to cry again. He shoved his hands beneath his legs to protect them. I should stop this, Juice thought. I should find a way to protect her, both of them. But what then? He was a nobody, new to the Stadwatch, new to this house. Besides, he had discovered in a burst of shame, I want to keep my job. Anya merely smiled and tilted her head back so she was looking at the sergeant. Shoot the glass. What did she say? Said the merchant. Sergeant, the captain barked out. Shoot the glass, Anya repeated. The sergeant's face went slack. He cocked his head to one side as if listening to a distant melody, then unslung his rifle and aimed at the observation window. Get down! Someone yelled. Juice threw himself to the ground, covering his head as the rapid hammer of gunfire filled his ears and bits of glass rained down on his hands. And back. His thoughts were a panicked clamor. His mind tried to deny it, but he knew what he'd just seen. Anya had commanded the sergeant to shoot the glass. She made him do it. But that couldn't be. Grisha Korpulki specialized in the human body. They could stop your heart, slow your breathing, snap your bones. They couldn't get inside your head. For a moment there was silence. Then Juiced was on his feet with everyone else, reaching for his rifle. Howard and the captain shouted at the same time, "Subdue her! Shoot her!" "Do you know how much money she's worth?" Hode retorted. "Somebody restrain her! Do not shoot!" Anya raised her hands, red sleeves spread wide. "Wait," she said. Juice's panic vanished. He knew he'd been frightened, but his fear was a distant thing. He was filled with expectation. He wasn't sure what was coming, or when, only that it would arrive, and that it was essential he be ready to meet it. It might be good or bad. He didn't really care. His heart was free of worry and desire. He longed for nothing, wanted for nothing. His mind was silent, his breath steady. He only needed to wait. He saw Anya rise and pick up the little boy. He heard her crooning tenderly to him, some Ravkin lullaby. "Open the door and come in, Hode," she said. Juice heard the words, understood them, forgot them. Hode walked to the door and slid the bolt free. He entered the steel cell. "Do as you're told, and this will be over, yeah?" Anya murmured with a smile. Her eyes were black and bottomless pools. Her skin was alight, glowing, incandescent. A thought flickered through Juice's mind. Beautiful as the moon. Anya shifted to the boy's weight in her arms. "Don't look," she murmured against his hair. "No," she said to Hode. "Pick up the knife."